Hello and welcome to another Social Studies Canvas module. Today we're going to be discussing the French and Indian War. So as the colonies begin to grow, a conflict arises between the French and the British territories. By the 1750s, the British had claimed control over the Ohio River Valley just across the Appalachian Mountains from the British colonies. Meanwhile, the French had built forts along the Great Lakes, and they too also claimed control over the Ohio River Valley southwest of their settlements. So both French and British are saying that they own that territory, and there lies the conflict, and they go to war. During the war, there's an attempt to try to unify the colonies. This attempt is called the Albany Plan of Union. A cartoonist by the name of Benjamin Franklin, also one of our founding fathers, creates a political cartoon called Join or Die. The purpose of this cartoon is to convince the colonies to unite and fight against the French, which they rejected. So war breaks out, and in 1754, the war happens between the British and the French, and they break out in war over the territory and who controls that territory in the Ohio River Valley. Because many Indian tribes sided with the French, the conflict became known as the French and Indian War. It's important to note that the French and Indian War is the French fighting with the Indians against the British. The French are not fighting against the Indians. They're fighting with them against the British over that territory control. The main battleground was located for this war, was located on the borders of Canada and the Hudson River. The British forces begin to make more advances and start to get closer to winning the war by capturing the French city of Quebec in 1759 and the French city of Montreal in 1760, and then they win the war. So some of the effects of the war included this. One, they signed a treaty in 1763. It was called the Treaty of Paris. This treaty, under the terms of this treaty, France lost most of its colonial empire in North America. So with that territory, who claims it now? Well, because the British won, they get to claim that territory. The victory of the British gave them control over the St. Lawrence River. That begins north of Maine and heads down south. And they also seized control of most French colonial territories in North America, including Canada and all the lands east of the Mississippi River. Another effect of the war was the Proclamation Line of 1763. So all that territory that was opened up after the war, a lot of colonists in the 13 colonies wanted to move west and settle in that territory. However, King George III issued a royal proclamation preventing any further Indian attacks with those colonists. So he declared that the colonists could not settle west of the Appalachian Mountains to avoid any further conflicts with the natives. And to enforce this proclamation, he sends 10,000 British redcoats to stay at that post and enforce this proclamation. So when those soldiers are there, they're going to need a place to stay and they're going to need something to eat. So then the king also enforces the Quartering Act. This was a legislation not only of the king, but with Parliament as well. They enforced the Quartering Act of 1765, and this required the colonists in the 13 colonies to provide food and shelter for these British soldiers. Many colonists saw this as evidence of British desire to further control the colonies. Another effect of the war was the debt. They spent a lot of money fighting in this war, and this caused the British government to go deeply into debt. British Parliament will make legislation increasing taxation on their colonies to pay back this debt. So some of those taxation acts included the following. The Navigation Act in 1651, and this was actually issued before the war, some time before the war, but because of salutary neglect and the distance, they weren't enforcing it as strictly as they could have been. Then Parliament also passes the Sugar Act in 1764, the Stamp Act in 1765, and the Townshend Act in 1767. We'll discuss these further in another lesson. But most of the colonists, they respond to these taxation acts with no taxation without representation. This is a battle cry for the Sons of Liberty and some other colonists. They do not want to be taxed without representation. And what that means is the English citizens have a voice in Parliament. And since those colonies are under British control, they should have a voice too. And that's another effect of the war. This concludes our discussion on the French and Indian War, and thank you for watching.